Welcome back to No Ordinary Path. It's John. Today I am excited to finally bring you guys my review of Hilo Medical Center on the Big Island of Hawaii. I know everyone has been waiting for this, and if you've been with us for the Hawaii content, you know there's been maybe, shall we just say, some controversy. I kind of want to leave that out of this for the most part. What this is going to be is an honest review of everything that I experienced, facts and figures, and some subjective stuff about working at Hilo Medical Center. It was an interesting experience, to say the least. There were certainly some challenges, and there were some things that I found interesting about how they do stuff. So let's just jump right into it. Hilo Medical Center, or I should probably say Hilo Binnenhof Medical Center, we'll talk more about that in a second, is located on the Big Island of Hawaii on the east side, which means it is the rainforest side. So certainly maybe a little more of not touristy, and we'll kind of talk some more about that towards the end of things too. Hilo Medical Center is a state hospital. What that means is that it is controlled by the state government of Hawaii. It sits on a 20-acre campus, which may not sound like much, but when you're thinking about it being on an island, every little bit of space is important. So it is a larger campus for the island. It is currently licensed for 166 acute care beds and 45 long-term care beds. It is a very busy place. As you might imagine, this is the largest hospital on the Big Island. This is where everybody goes. Now, there are other hospitals that are located on the island of Hawaii, but they are smaller by nature and the services that they offer are limited. So whenever there's anything significant that's going on the Big Island, it's most likely going to be centered at Hilo Medical Center. So HMC, as most of the locals call it, is one of the largest employers on the Big Island. You're going to have somewhere around 1,500 total staff at this hospital. Around 250 of those are going to be provider level staff. That means physicians, PAs, and NPs, of which they do utilize a fair amount of. You're going to have around 33 different specialties that you'll see at this hospital when it comes to those providers. Most of the specialties that you would require as generalized care, you're going to find at this hospital. Things like cardiology, nephrology, neurology, endocrine, things like that, obstetrics, certainly emergency department, GI, surgeons, those type of typical things. Now, some of the more specialized type of stuff, you're going to have to go off island, generally to Oahu, Honolulu area, to some of those bigger level 1 trauma hospital that is in the state. All right, it is a level 3 trauma center, and that means that they are, can handle most things that come into the ER, but I'm gonna say this about it. This is the largest emergency department on the entire island. So it functions kind of like the level 1 for the island of Hawaii. Major emergencies are going to come into this emergency department, get stabilized, and then transferred out to generally Oahu. They see a lot of trauma. It is constant trauma alerts all the time. The ER on average sees around 55,000 patients annually, and honestly, that's just increasing every year from what I've been told. It is a teaching facility, being the largest medical facility on the island. Again, you're going to have residents, you're going to have nursing students, that kind of stuff. So you will have some, residents to kind of work with if you enjoy something like that, although it does not feel like your typical teaching hospital. As the population of this island has increased year by year, the need for more space has also increased, and also more specialized care and just general updates of everything at this hospital. An expansion has been in the works for many years, but recently, with a significant donation from a gentleman named Mark Binnenhof, some exciting things are happening. Mark is the CEO for a company called Salesforce, which is known for its cloud-based business solutions, and he's also kind of known as a CEO who gives big. And I'm talking about like $50 million kind of gives big. The expansion for this hospital is going to be a really big deal. It's going to open up a whole lot more room. They're going to add more beds, including adding 8 more beds to the intensive care unit. It's going to make it, they're going to move it from where it is currently to a new area, update everything, and make it a 19-bed ICU unit, which is Honestly, probably not as big as it should be still, but it's definitely going to be better than it is currently. Being the size that they are and the location that they're at, they certainly do have some challenges, one of which is staffing limitations. One of the things that they have to deal with is trying to get physician services there and retain them. I said that they have most of the generalized stuff. I know for a fact that they would love to diversify and increase their neuro program, but one of the things they need is like a neurotype surgeon. And it's hard to get someone to move to the island of Hawaii, which sounds ironic, but it is, and stay there in order to run something like that. That does present a challenge. And that's one of the limitations that they have. In addition to that, they also have some supply chain stuff that is a little bit more unique to just the location. You guys, stuff has to get shipped over from other places. So sometimes we'd be working and we wouldn't have specific supplies like the Mepalexes for the patient's butts that we like to put on everybody in the ICU. We wouldn't have those for a week or so. So you have to kind of improvise and work around. And this is just some of the things that are very common and typical to them, but maybe something that a travel nurse from the mainland is not necessarily used to. One other thing I was surprised to learn about is that they do have obstetrics there. They do not have any kind of NICU whatsoever. So if there is any kind of neonatal issue, I know that the mother-baby nurses are and labor and delivery nurses are trained in those things, but they fly those little ones out as soon as possible, or honestly try to mitigate it beforehand by making sure mom isn't delivering there, but is going to go to one of the larger hospitals on one of the other islands to deliver. Now it's time to just jump into my review. I work in the intensive care unit. The intensive care unit is currently 11 beds. Typical ICU in the fact that it is generalized, it's not subspecialized. They do see a wide range of patients of all sorts of different kinds. They are a primary stroke center here at this hospital, so we do see some neurotype stuff, although any significant neuro intervention is going to be shipped out. They do have a cath lab, as I mentioned, so they will take, PCI type patients, cath lab, heart attacks, all that kind of stuff, stents. They do have balloons that they see on occasion, and they do have impellas that they take care of on occasion. Those two patients compromise, for the most part, the most critical patients that they generally see, with the exception, of course, of some really significant sepsis cases. And the sepsis here can be quite a doozy. What I mean by that is, being in a tropical rainforest, there are certainly some new type of infectious diseases that I have not worked with before. They get a lot of leptospirosis. They get a lot of some of these just interesting fungal and bacterial infections. Had a couple of patients with some really interesting wounds, really interesting fungal infections and stuff like that. And they have something really kind of unique here called ratworm lung disease, which just Google it. I'm just gonna leave it at that. Just Google it, you guys. It's some wild stuff. It is a intensivist ICU, but it is not intensivist driven. What that means is that they do have two doctors that are technically intensivists. I believe they're both pulmonary trained, that are there that kind of oversee the patients, but they don't manage all the patients. And this is kind of just one of those things of mine that I dislike, but it's you're gonna have them there, but you're also gonna have lots of hospitalists taking care of your patients. They, being a teaching hospital, they have different teams that they work with, all the way down to even family medicine, which I found kind of interesting that family medicine is rounding on intensive care unit patients. Nobody received bad care or anything like that, but I just always prefer to have patients that are managed by an intensivist in an ICU. That's my personal preference from all of the different contracts and places where I have worked. Busy, busy. This place is hopping. It is always full. There is never empty rooms. And I will say, most of the time when I came in, I almost always was like admitting someone new, meaning I was discharging one of my patients to PCU, sometimes out of the hospital entirely, and admitting somebody like almost immediately afterwards. There are almost always holds in the ER. There are patients constantly upgrading. It is an exceptionally busy unit. For that reason, there is almost no, well, I will say there is no floating for travel nurses, which is one of the things I certainly did like about this. I did float down to the ER to take ICU holds, but I still only had 2 patients, so it doesn't really feel like a float. I'm just in a different unit still taking care of ICU vented patients. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about some of the subjective type stuff. I'm gonna start with things that I didn't like because I don't wanna end on a bad note. Again, this is my experience. It's gonna be subjective to me. There are some things that didn't bother other travelers. These are some of the things that I didn't like. Working at this hospital, despite its large size and the fact that, well, large size relative to the area and the bed capacity, still sort of felt like working at a critical access hospital. There are limitations to a lot of the things that they had, and just the interactions with some of the personnel and some of the physicians kind of made it feel smaller than it really was. Some of the practices and some of the things that we did maybe feel a little outdated, just even in interaction between staff. That's one of the other things I've got listed on here. The relationship with the physicians was somewhat challenging at this hospital. Now, I had really good relationships with a couple of the docs, mainly the intensivists. Some of the relationships that we have with some of the hospitalists, some of the overnight physicians, because I did work both nights and days on this contract, were challenging. There's a little bit of an older, I'd say maybe 20 years back in practice feeling of, hey, you're just the nurse. There is not much autonomy here. There's not a whole lot of nurses kind of giving input to the physicians with good reception. There are certainly exceptions to the rule. I would just say that majority I felt, and maybe it was me as a traveler, I'm not sure, but I felt like the relationships between the doctors and the nurses was somewhat strained, at least to ones that I have felt at other hospitals. And I don't think it's just the travelers either. I think this was the staff. Again, that's my perception. Also being an experienced nurse, I've got, 14 years of nursing under my belt here, almost 15 now, and, over 20, almost 25 in the healthcare system entirely. So that was one of the things that I kind of struggled with a little bit. I did actually have a physician at one point in time tell me, I'm just a nurse, I don't need your opinion. Or you're just a nurse, I don't need your opinion. Speaking of travelers and the relationship with travelers, I think it was best put by another travel nurse there that the travelers at this hospital are fair weather friends. What that person meant by this was that when we are needed and the staffing is difficult, we are great. Everybody likes the fact that we are there. And when we're not, there's a little bit of an us versus them mentality. Not everybody was like this. Again, this is my opinion. This is what I felt. And it's not necessarily from the staff that I'm working with. I would say some of it is more hospital policy. For example, during the interview process, one of the things that landed me the job was that I had all this experience. I've taken care of balloon patients and impellas and all this kind of stuff. Well, at this hospital, it is policy that despite your experience, if you're not core, you can't ever take care of any of those sick patients. And I will say there were a couple of days where we had a few of these patients, and some of the nurses there were considerably less experienced than I was. And even though I asked to take these assignments, I was told that I can't because I'm a travel nurse. And to me, I get it, the policy, I get it, but at the same time, if you can prove competency, especially if you find yourself as the traveler constantly going in there and helping the staff, I feel like you sort of maybe put patients at a risk there of having an inexperienced nurse managing something that a much more experienced nurse could potentially manage, at least more comfortably. Maybe not better, but at least with more comfort. So that's my 2 cents. One of the most awkward experiences I've ever had as a traveler occurred to me at this hospital, and it was during Certified Nurses Day. And if you don't know what that is, there are specialty certifications that a nurse can obtain above and beyond their standard degrees and stuff that allow them to practice. I have a couple, one of which is my CCRN, that's my Critical Care Registered Nurse. It's a difficult certification to obtain and means a lot to me and generally a lot to the medical community for those nurses that have done the extra to earn said certifications. There is a day that's celebrated. Generally what happens is most hospitals come around with something to celebrate the nurses. At this hospital, they came around with like a treat cart, it's usually like ice cream or candy or something like pizza, whatever. And they said, hey, happy Certified Nurses Day. Who's certified? Let's recognize the certified nurses on the unit. And all the certified nurses kind of came up and came over to the cart, and being one of those nurses, I came over to the cart too and immediately got stopped by the person that was doing all of this and says, oh, you're a traveler. This is only for the core staff. And it was just really awkward for me and really awkward for everybody else around. It got even worse because then they wanted to take a picture of all of the certified nurses. And it wasn't just, I wasn't the only traveler that had this experience that day. It happened to a couple of us, and it was just really awkward. And for somebody who's been involved in education and even management at some point in time, it's just really wild that you wouldn't include the staff that are there supporting you for something like as simple as like, oh, here's an ice cream treat, you know? So that was, again, another example of how we're sort of like the fair weather friends. Last one here, I'm just gonna say this. It is a very micromanaged unit. Take that for what you will. Some people can work with that. I can work with that, but it was kind of just kind of odd. I didn't think it was necessary sometimes. Management is always kind of constantly walking around. They're constantly in your charts, constantly making sure something is done. And as somebody who has, again, like I said, been in management and education, I understand like why it's good to do that kind of stuff. But at the same time, it came down to kind of silly nitpicky things like, you know, you can't ever have, you know, open or not open, but even any kind of water container on the unit. Like, you know, there's no designated drink station. Everything has to be hidden, all that kind of, like, having worked at so many hospitals across the entire nation, it's just kind of funny what some places will really kind of nitpick about. And there was a lot of that at this hospital. There is a little bit of an us versus them mentality at the patients too. Now that could be for a number of reasons. That might be because I'm a mainlander. If you followed some of our other Hawaii content, you certainly know the challenges that we've kind of faced with that. It could be because I'm a man. It could be because I'm a white man. I don't know. I faced some of that a little bit at work as well. Not from any of the staff, from the patient population. All right, let's talk about the things that I liked. Like, I loved not floating. That was wonderful. This is the only contract I've ever been on where he didn't have to float. Meditech. I don't generally like Meditech, but this place did have a decent version of it, so I appreciated how they tailored it to their hospital, and it was good. I liked the fact that Epic is coming soon. Nice. Everybody helped as a team when needed. That is generally one of the things that makes or breaks a travel contract for most of us. I don't know if I would go back, just because, not of the hospital, but because of some of the other stuff we experienced while on the contract. I don't know if I would go back to this location because of a bunch of other things. There were certainly challenges at the hospital, more so maybe than any other place. One other thing I remember that really bothered me one day was the fact that they did triple me with 3 ICU patients, and they had one other staff nurse who only had 1 patient because she needed the open bed. So there was a lot of stuff like that for the travelers that I found challenging, maybe more so than normal. I'm not trying to step on anybody's toes. I don't want to hurt feelings, but I want you guys to have an honest review here of what it was like working at this hospital. It certainly was a challenge in a lot of different regards. So I hope you found this informative. Thank you for being a part of this. Thank you for being open-minded, listening to what I have to say. Again, it's subjective. This is my opinion. It's not yours. If you want to give it a shot, go work with them. They're not bad people. There was just some unique challenges there that I faced that I was a little surprised to. So anyway, you guys, thanks for being here. Give the video a thumbs up. That always helps. And